Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today's topic is Scrum versus Kanban. My name is Erin Lett. I am the Operations Manager here at Blackbard Management Consulting. I hold a bachelor's degree from Stetson University in Communications, and I have been working in the SAP, e-learning, and software development industries for the past 6 years now. Before we begin, I just wanted to go over real briefly what will be covered in today's webinar. We're going to briefly discuss waterfall development, then we're going to move into Scrum in a nutshell, then Kanban in a nutshell, and then we're going to take a look at some of the similarities and differences between both of them, and then talk about some of the advantages and which ones would be more appropriate for your specific organization to use. So, all right, well, if you're joining me here today, you are probably already a little bit familiar with the various software development methodologies in the field of software engineering. Debates on various development method pros and cons are countless, but today I just want to spend just a little bit of time discussing two of the most commonly used methodologies, and that is Scrum and Kanban, as well as how they relate to waterfall development and the various differences. So let's begin with a little introduction to waterfall development. Waterfall development is another name for the more traditional approach to software development. It's called waterfall as this type of development is often planned using a sequential Gantt chart design. So progress is viewed as flowing downward, as you can see here by this slide. You complete one phase, such as planning, before moving on to the next phase, such as the development stages. Waterfall actually originated in the manufacturing and construction industries. In waterfall approaches, since one phase is completed before moving on to the next phase, you will rarely have the opportunity to revisit a phase. So it's important to note here that once a phase has been completed, that you normally aren't going to go back and repeat it. So you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing, you get it right the first time. This approach is also highly risky, often more costly, and generally less efficient than more agile approaches. The main issues with this approach include problems such as you won't realize any real value until the end of the project, and that's when you're actually ready to deploy. Another issue is you leave the testing until the end, which means you're also leaving issue discovery until late in the project as well. Also, you won't really seek approval from the stakeholders or company heads until later, and sometimes their requirements may have completely changed, and you won't find that out until it's too late. You're also heavily reliant upon a plan, which you can and will likely sometimes follow to the detriment of the end result of the project. Also, you're heavily reliant upon a project manager to drive the way of the project, and sometimes this can become issues as, it's seen as AKA the power of one. Because of these various issues, skepticism obviously quickly grew, and organizations began looking for more efficient development methodologies, such as the two we're going to talk about now, Scrum and Kanban. So let's begin with Scrum. Scrum is an agile development framework used for completing complex projects. Scrum originally was created for software development projects, but it works pretty well for just about any kind of complex, innovative project scope. The possibilities with Scrum are endless, as the framework is deceptively simple, and we're going to talk more about that here in just a few moments. But first, one of the key factors of Scrum is that it emphasizes team collaboration and provides a small set of rules that create just enough structure for development teams to be able to focus their innovation on solving what might otherwise be seen as insurmountable challenges. Scrum also gives power to the business to prioritize and even change development requirements, but at the same time, it also gives the power to the team to commit to the requirements per their capacity. Still talking about Scrum, let's just spend a few moments now discussing the Scrum framework that I mentioned on the previous slide. With Scrum, you are able to split your development teams up into small cross-functional and self-organizing teams. This allows you to then split your workload into a list of small and concrete deliverables, arranging the list by priorities, where you will then estimate the relative effort to be spent on completing each item. So instead of a large group spending a long time building a big thing, you have a small team spending a short amount of time building a small thing, but integrating regularly to see the whole. Another important aspect of Scrum is that all the work done, it's done in iterative and it's incremental. So it's splitting time into short, fixed-length iterations and potentially shippable code demonstrated after each iteration. And we're going to talk about this in a little greater detail in just a moment. Scrum also allows you to optimize the release plan. This enables development teams to work with the customer in order to update priorities throughout the development process, which, as I mentioned before, Waterfall does not allow. Scrum also allows you to optimize the development process and emphasizes feedback, and this is important. The team can get feedback from the customer as early as possible and deliver an actual working product that will be used. It also allows the team to retrospect on their performance and improve upon it within short cycles. So let's move on now to Kanban. Kanban is another technique commonly used for managing a software development process in a highly efficient way. Kanban utilizes Toyota's just-in-time production system concept of making only what is needed when it's needed and in the amount needed. Although producing software is a creative activity and therefore different to mass-producing, say, cars, the underlying mechanism for managing the production line can still be applied. Kanban primarily follows 4 core principles. Let's talk about those now. The first of those 4 principles is to visualize the work. What this means is that you want to create a visual model of work and workflow in order to observe the flow of work moving through the Kanban system. And this can be done by splitting the work into smaller pieces, writing the work item on something such as a piece of paper or index card, and putting it up on a task board. You want to use named columns to illustrate where each item is in the development workflow. This making the work visible, along with things such as task blockers, bottlenecks, and queues, instantly leads to increased team communication and collaboration. The next principle is limit work in progress, otherwise known as WIP. This means you want to limit how much unfinished work in progress there is and reduce the time it takes an item to travel through the Kanban development system. Problems caused by actions such as task switching and the need to constantly reprioritize items can be reduced by limiting the work in progress. It's also very important to assign explicit limits to how many items may be in progress at each workflow state. The next thing we want to focus on is the flow. By using work in progress limits, developing team-driven policies, and analyzing the flow of work, the Kanban system can be optimized to improve and smooth out the workflow progress. So you can collect metrics to analyze flow and set indicators that can actually alert the team of future problems. Focusing on flow will allow teams to measure factors such as lead times or the average time required to complete an item, which is also called cycle time. It also allows teams to optimize processes in order to make lead times as small and predictable as possible. And finally, the last principle is to continuously improve. Once the Kanban system is in place, it becomes the cornerstone for a culture of continuous improvement. Teams measure their effectiveness by tracking flow, quality, throughput, lead times, and more. Experiments and analysis can then be used to change the system to improve the team's effectiveness. All right, so that's Scrum and Kanban in a nutshell. Both are used as development process tools and are implemented in order to accomplish a specific development task or purpose. Scrum being more prescriptive, and that means it has more rules to follow, and Kanban being more adaptive with fewer rules. So you might now be asking yourself, okay, which is better, Scrum or Kanban? Well, the answer isn't really black and white. It truly depends on your context. It's kind of the same as asking which is better, a knife or a fork, or chopsticks. For eating spaghetti, the fork is probably best. For chopping vegetables, the knife is probably best. And for eating a steak, you probably want to use both tools together. And for eating Chinese, well, some prefer a fork while others prefer chopsticks. So when comparing tools, you should be careful. You want to compare for understanding, not for judgment. So basically, neither one is perfect or complete for every circumstance. One or the other won't depict everything you need to do. They can each only provide certain constraints and guidelines. So the true value is found in the fact that both tools help development teams limit options. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the major differences between Scrum and Kanban. Hopefully by doing this, I can better help you make a decision as to which process tool is best for you and your individual organization's needs. So let's begin with the various roles of Scrum. Scrum consists of three main roles: the product owner, the development team, and the Scrum Master. The product owner defines and communicates the product requirements to the development team. They represent the stakeholders and the voice of the customer. One per team is allotted, and it's their job to prioritize and empathize with the team and the stakeholders. Their tasks are things such as demonstrating solutions, announcing releases, and organizing milestones. The second role, the development team, delivers the potentially shippable increments of product, otherwise known as PSIs. The team generally consists of 3 to 9 self-organizing team members, all with cross-functional skills who analyze, design, develop, test, and document the item or task at hand. Last but most important is the Scrum Master that facilitates the Scrum. This role acts as a buffer between the team and any distractions, so they remove product impediments, and they also make sure to enforce the Scrum rules. Kanban, on the other hand, doesn't prescribe any roles, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a team leader, a project manager, or even a product owner. It just means that you don't have to. But you want to be careful when adding roles. Ensure that any additional role actually adds value to the project and does not conflict with other elements of the process. Sometimes it's best to keep in mind that less is more. All right, another major difference between Scrum and Kanban to be considered are time boxes. Scrum is based on time box iterations. You can choose the length of the iteration, but the general idea is to keep the same length of iteration over a period of time, thereby establishing what is referred to as cadence. Cadence means to develop a sustainable pace over multiple sprints over the course of a project. This cadence establishes a reliable and dependable capability which demonstrates a predictable capacity, thereby providing confidence in the upcoming work when teams are triggering rather than scheduling work. So let's talk about these iterations for just a few moments. And let's start with the beginning of the iteration. At the beginning, an iteration plan is created. So the team pulls out a specific number of items from the product backlog based on the product owner's priorities, and how much the team thinks they can complete in one iteration is then determined. During the iteration, the team focuses on completing the items they committed to, keeping in mind that the scope of the iteration is fixed. At the end of the iteration, the team demonstrates the working code to the relevant stakeholders or product owners. Now, ideally, this code should be potentially shippable, as I said before, meaning that it is tested and it's actually ready to go. Then the team does a retrospective to discuss and improve their development process. So, in a nutshell, a Scrum iteration is one single time box cadence combining 3 different activities: planning, process management, and ideally release. In Kanban, time box iterations are not prescribed, but you do have the option to include iterations if you so choose. You can choose when to do planning, process improvement, and the actual release. You can even choose to do these activities on a regular basis, say released every Monday, or on demand, releasing it whenever you have something useful to release. Another difference between Scrum and Kanban are tasks and estimates. In Scrum, planning meetings are held, as we previously talked about, where the Scrum team will sit down together and determine how much work they feel they can complete in a time box in order to deliver an increment. In Kanban, there are no task estimates, and as I mentioned before, planning meetings are not a requirement. The team will simply take the next item of order and begin working on that item until it's completed. Both Scrum and Kanban limit work in progress, but they do this in different ways. Scrum teams usually track velocity, that is, how many items or corresponding units such as story points are completed per iteration. This tracking is intended to help Scrum teams become better committed to what they achieve during each time box. Once the team knows their velocity, that becomes their work in progress limit, or at least a guideline. For example, a team that has an average velocity of 10 will usually not pull in more than 10 items or story points to a sprint. So in Scrum, work in progress is limited per unit of time. In Kanban, velocity is not tracked, but rather the flow of 3 things are tracked instead. That's queues, work in progress, and cycle times. Queues are the waiting times required for the service to begin on an item. Work in progress, as already discussed, is how many items are currently being worked on. And cycle time is the time it takes for an item to be completed once the work has begun. Okay, so process owners. In Scrum, the process owner is the Scrum Master, whom we talked about earlier on in this webinar. As I mentioned, the Scrum Master obtains important details about the defined development process and then provides those details to the Scrum team. In Kanban, the team owns the process as opposed to one specific leader. There is no fixed defined process, but the team takes the process at hand, provides measurements of queues, work in progress, and cycle times, completes the work, and then determines how they can continually improve upon their development process. All right, so real quick, I just want to go over the advantages of Scrum and Kanban as we're winding down this webinar. Advantages of Scrum are things such as transparency, product stability, allowing the client to change priorities and requirements, and a few others that you can see listed there. Now, advantages of Kanban are flexibility, increased efficiency, the team has the ability to focus, and it really cuts down on wasted work and wasted time. And last but not least, the question organizations often ask is, which framework should be used with our teams? Should we use Scrum or should we use Kanban? Well, instead, the questions managers should be asking is, which aspect of Scrum and which aspects of Kanban can we use to efficiently develop products and services? Given the advantages of both approaches, it should be up to the development and the production teams to choose which framework will work best for them. More recently, some teams have started combining both frameworks and use the best practices from each different method to achieve better team synergies and improve productivity. There might be teams who feel comfortable with Kanban and others who are more comfortable with Scrum. A nice approach could be to coach teams on both practices and leave the decisions to them to use best practices from both. And as we have seen, both Scrum and Kanban are flexible and do not have hardcore processes to be followed, so it could be easy and also very worthwhile for teams to explore practices from both that enable them to function as highly productive teams that continuously improve. All right, so there we have it. That is Scrum and Kanban in a nutshell. I just want to see, does anybody have any questions that we can address here? Let me just check here and see. Okay, all right. Adam, why is it called Scrum? Oh, okay. Interesting question. Haven't been asked that in a while. Scrum is actually a rugby term. You might be surprised to know that the Scrum Development Framework was initially called rugby because the team, as in rugby, passes the ball back and forth, or aka passing the task back and forth. Later, it was renamed Scrum because a scrum in rugby means that the whole game should be restarted when something weird or wrong happens. Does that explain your? Yeah? Okay. All right. All right. Thanks, Adam. Okay, we're just about out of time. So if you do have any additional questions, please feel free to email us at info@blackbar.com. And also, if you're interested in the next step of the process, if you want to get a consultation, feel free to also email us, and we'll be able to get back with you as soon as possible and set you up with a consultation with one of our consultants. All right, so I just want to thank you guys again, and thanks for spending your little afternoon with me, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.